welcome back to the How Do I Become podcast. This is your host, Chris Gouveia. In this episode, we'll be exploring how do I become a certified public accountant, CPA. I hope you enjoy. All right, welcome to the podcast, Angela Nguyen, an accountant for Deloitte. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So tell us again, what's your current title and position?
So my current title at Deloitte is an audit senior assistant, and this is typically the title you get when you start doing your second year at Deloitte.
Okay, and you've just, so this is your second year. So you came straight out of college to Deloitte?
Yeah, I came straight out of college, but I did do my internship with them in between the summer of my junior year and senior year of college.
Okay, great. So you've been there for 2 years now, and we talked yesterday briefly about kind of what to expect during this interview, and you told me some exciting news that you have finished your CPA examination. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I finally finished passing all four parts of my CPA. It was definitely a struggle because a lot of it is studying while I'm working.
Mm.
And I think that was the hardest part. But now I'm super relieved to finally be able to just work, get off, and not have to worry about anything else.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, and I was shocked to find out it was a 4-part CPA exam. So maybe that's a good transition for talking about the path to becoming a CPA. Tell me about the path that you took to get to where you are now.
Yeah, so I guess this goes back to when I was in community college and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I decided that I wanted to transfer to schools the under like the business administration path, but I
Hmm.
wasn't really clear on where I wanted to focus. My mom actually pushed me a lot to go into accounting because she was in accounting before,
Okay,
but that's actually one of the big reasons why I didn't want to go into it because I didn't want to
sure.
go. Yeah, I didn't want to just do what my mom did.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but as I took the classes, I realized out of all the classes I took for like the biz admin path, the only one I found interesting or the one that I was actually like decently excited to study for was accounting.
Uh-huh.
So when I transferred to UCLA, I decided to, start interviewing for these internships, and I started to join clubs for accounting. Um, Oh, and then just to backtrack, sorry. For my second year of community college, once I knew that I kind of wanted to go into accounting, what I did was I actually applied for an internship with a local tax firm. And then from there, I was kind of able to pick up, what it was like to work. I guess it just helped me get started. That's the biggest thing. Like of course, like, taking the classes it's not exactly what goes on in the real world.
Sure.
So by having that internship, I was able to really see what it was like to work with the tax clients, what it's like to work with other small businesses, help them out with their bookkeeping. And I found that I really liked the client facing part of it. And then from there, when I got to UCLA, I decided I didn't want to go into tax because I like the client facing part of it based on my internship with that tax firm. And for accounting, when you are applying for this, there's usually three paths people take. There's the advisory path, the audit path, or the tax path, especially when you're applying for like these big fours or these mid-tier firms.
Okay.
For those paths, usually for audit, it's a lot of client facing work. You're helping out a company audit their financial statements, and it's a lot of teamwork. It's a lot
Hmm.
of working at the client side, working with with the members of your team. While tax is more individual, you're working on your own most of the time, and you're not really at the client side as much. So I decided to stick with audit because it had a lot of it was basically revolved around accounting. It was a lot of teamwork and it was very client facing. It was what I enjoyed.
Okay, that's super helpful because that's something that I'd never heard before. So again, it's audit, tax, and then what's the third one?
Advisory.
Okay, so those are the big 3 kind of within accounting, and then, you mentioned the Big 4 accounting firms. It sounds like so you're at Deloitte, which is one of the Big 4. Tell me the other
Mhm.
3, and then tell me kind of big pros and cons between working at one of these big firms versus not.
Yeah, so the other three big four firms are PwC, EY, and KPMG. So I guess to explain the pros and cons of working on a big four versus um, everything else, it requires like an understanding of what it means to work at a big four, mid tier, or private or public accounting.
Okay.
So there's a difference between private and public accounting. Private accounting is, I think, what people normally think of is the accountants that actually work at the specific company, like an accountant at Netflix or accountant at Google. So that accountant mainly just works for one company. For public accounting, we take on many different clients. So we're not just one company's accountant. I have like multiple clients that I'm working for, and that's typically the difference. Like we are like clients hire like companies hire us to do the accounting for them
Right.
versus in private accounting, you're working for that one specific firm
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or one specific company. Sorry.
And a lot of times the company will have their own in-house, and then they'll also have a separate company, often another Big Four, that audits them, correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that in-house would be private accounting, and
Okay.
the company they're hiring to audit them or to do their taxes, that those are the public accountants.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah. So, and then within public accounting, basically you have your regional firms, you have your big four, you have your mid tiers. I think during the application or the recruitment process for me, the biggest difference was did I want to do a big four or do I want to do a mid tier?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the pros and cons between the big four and the mid tiers is that for the big four, you're working with very large clients. You're working in larger teams. You know, the accounting for it and the audit for it is more complex versus the mid tiers, you're working on smaller clients. So you kind of get to touch like almost everything in
Mm.
the audit process versus for the big four, let's say you're going to focus on like cash or you're going to focus on revenue or you're going to focus on one part of the financial statement.
Okay. Wow.
But overall, I think the pro for working at a mid tier is the pay is higher because they want to be competitive. So working at a mid tier, you do get higher pay, and at the end, you still, you know, you're still getting your CPA with them. They're still paying for that. You're still going. There's still the same promotion levels as there is with the big four. You're still working in a team like you are with the big four. I think the big four just has a little more resources just because it has like deeper pockets. But yeah, it's just I guess the biggest difference is would be the work that you get to touch. The big four, it's a lot more complex and you're focusing on one area versus mid tiers is not as complex and you're able to touch everything, but again, it's not as complex, so you're not, diving deep into those topics.
Okay. Really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about the difference between public and private accounting again?
Yeah, so for public accounting, you're usually representing many different companies and you're working with many different clients. For private accounting, you're working at one company and you're doing their accounting for them and you're sticking with that same job for however long you're at that title or at that position. And I think the biggest like the big one of the biggest factors people need to think of when they want to go into accounting is do they want to start working in public accounting or do they want to work in private accounting?
Mm-hmm.
For public accounting, the hours are usually more crazy. You have your busy seasons. You're working on multiple things at once. You have to expect like inconsistency, and you have to expect like you have to be adaptable to all these different scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
For private accounting, your job is more consistent. There are still, the busy times, especially during the month end and the closing times, but you're typically doing the same thing throughout your position
Mm-hmm.
and you're not jumping between clients to clients. And you're usually for that, the job is a little more stable. Um, and I also think that the biggest difference too is the promotions. For private accounting, to get promoted, you're usually waiting for the person on top to leave their job or to get promoted before you can rise up to that position. For public accounting, there's a pretty basic promotion track. You do your first 2 years as staff, you do your next 3 years as senior, you do your next couple years as manager, senior manager, and then all the way up to partner. Usually for public accounting, you can expect to also work with people around like for who are fresh out of college and around your age.
Mm-hmm.
And then for for private accounting, usually working with people who's been at that company for a very long time. You're working with a mixed group of people. It's not exactly like a bunch of people at your level and around your age group. So that's kind of the biggest difference between starting off at like public accounting or private accounting.
So that was the decision that you were making coming out of your undergraduate studies.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people who tend to graduate college, they kind of steer towards public accounting because one, it pays for your CPA. Two, you're working with a lot of
Mhm.
people around who are in the same shoes as you, who are just out of college themselves. There's a consistent promotion track, and it is your early years of working. So working those long hours wouldn't it's not as sacrificing as if you were later down the line, married, having kids, things like that.
So you mentioned that Deloitte, they're paying part of your CPA, but I think one of the questions I had for accounting in general is being an accountant or having an accounting degree versus pursuing the CPA. So can you tell me a little bit about what that differentiation is and maybe some of the pros and cons that come with that?
So CPA stands for Certified Public Accountant. Basically, having your CPA versus being an accountant is is mainly a title difference. So having your CPA, it opens more doors for you in terms of leveling up. It allows you to file and represent under the IRS, and versus being an accountant, you're still able to do, the same things that you would expect from an accountancy job. It's just at the end of the day mainly a title and what you can represent.
Yeah, sure. So a CPA can actually sign tax return and represent a client before the tax audit. So I can imagine that the higher you rise up and the larger the clients you're representing, they would want that certification at least from someone within your firm. So especially for the big firms, it makes sense that they have a lot of CPAs. And for the lower, the smaller groups, it seems like having at least one CPA on the door that can represent the clients that they're doing their audits makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, it's like for the firms that are CPA firms, you would need a lot, like a more so like a majority of people to be CPAs,
Right.
which is why, when we're getting promoted and we're going up the ranks, it becomes a requirement to have our CPA because they want as many people as CPAs as possible.
Sure. Can you tell me about your day to day and maybe what the busy seasons are for you and what those times are like?
So off busy season and like during busy season, I think are two completely different things.
Sure.
For busy season, so for those who don't know what the busy season for at least for audit is, so at the end of every year, typically a company they would file their annual financial statements. What happens for that is that after like after 12/31, after December 31st, up until the day that they want to file their annual financial statements, the audit team, which is us, we're working on making sure that they did they did their financials correctly. They had the correct processes in place to make sure the numbers are accurate, things like that. So off busy season, usually we're doing the review we're preparing for that annual financial statement, and our workload is usually a little lighter. It does get a little busy once we hit the quarterly reports when the company has to release that. But during busy season, it it is a lot more hectic. Not because I guess not because for the whole you're spending the whole year preparing for this one busy season. At the end of the day, like that busy season's hectic because we have a really like strong deadline to file the
Mhm.
financial statements. So usually my
What
work
are those busy times?
so there's busy times around December to it depends on the client, but it's usually around end of February to mid March. Yeah.
And during those times, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. Go ahead.
I was going to say during those busy times, what are your general, work schedules like?
Yeah. So I usually come in at 9 during the first half of it. I able to probably go home around like 8 or 9. Once the busy season starts picking up and once we're getting through the halfway point and the deadline's getting close, could probably stay like later than that. I'm also working
Wow.
weekends. Yes, I don't mean to scare anyone, but the hours do get pretty harsh during those times. But the nice part is that I like working in teams and I
Right.
like working around people. So, that whole day you're working with your team and you're not really alone. And, the free lunches and dinners do help. The
Sure.
coffee runs do help. Um, yeah, and I guess I think the best way to describe it is kind of like working on a group project back in college and like, you and your whole group are like working late at night trying to finish as much as you can. That's the biggest comparison to it. But off busy season, it's usually pretty relaxing. You work the normal 9 to 6. It's not too bad. There's not a lot of tight deadlines except for when the quarterly reports come around. Again, this is very dependent though on what kind of clients you would get.
Sure.
Like, for example, if because then there's different types of clients. There's a public client or you can have a private client. A public client is typically someone who files their financials with the SEC. They're usually on the stock market. So for those clients, it's pretty the scheduling is pretty consistent. You do your busy season after December, usually files in February and March, and then around the end of each quarter, you do the quarterly filing. But for private clients, it can be pretty random.
Hmm.
Like for example, this past summer, I was on a private client and I was doing their year-end filing so they can file their audit report. And it wasn't exactly a busy season. We still had a deadline, but I
Right.
wasn't working like the normal 12-hour shifts, but it was still like, very busy, very hectic, things like that.
Sure, that makes sense. Where would you advise a young person or someone looking to pursue accounting to go to for more info?
For a young person who wants to find out more about where to get into this and how they can get into this is to look at the resources at their colleges. For me, that was the most helpful thing. There's usually a lot of accounting clubs like SAS, Beta Alpha Psi,
Hmm.
sorry, for Student Accounting Society, and Beta Alpha Psi, that's usually an accounting frat. By joining these student organizations, you're connecting with a lot more people who have been in your shoes during recruitment or who are pretty knowledgeable about these different paths. And
Hmm.
it really opens your eyes on what you can do. Because before I transferred, all I knew was I want to go into accounting. There's big fours, and
Uh-huh.
that's about it. That's all I knew.
Hmm.
And then when I transferred to UCLA, I joined the Student Accounting Society and Beta Alpha Psi. And from there, I was able to meet all these different students who are doing the same thing as me, who have done the same thing as me. And they're the one who's taught me, these are the three different paths: advisory, tax, audit, that you can do when you're applying for the big fours. This is the difference between the big fours and the mid tiers. And they're the ones who have, done those internships or who have done these interviews. So they tell you, this is how you interview for these jobs. This is what they're looking for on your resume. This is how you talk to them at Meet the Firms. And it's really great because it's just a bunch of students helping each other out and teaching them, what these different paths are. So I think my biggest suggestion is to definitely take advantage of the fact that you're at a school where there's a lot of students around you who are trying to do the same things that you've done and also know about these things. So definitely reach out to those student organizations and try to be a part of that and learn from them.
Yeah, using those student organizations, I mean, you're using them for mentorship and networking and really giving you the guidance that you need. Like you said, I had never heard of a lot of these different pathways within accounting, and it sounds like you were in a similar position when you joined UCLA. And I think it's a reason why I hope that this type of podcast can help people that, don't have a parent that's an accountant or something like that. They can actually hear this information from someone who's living it and giving them that same advice. Can you tell me a little bit about what that transition was like as you finished college and transitioned into the first job? You said you had interned at Deloitte before you started, but what was it like actually going into practice?
Yeah, so it was actually very new because a lot of the stuff you learn in school, they can't teach you how to do this job.
Hmm.
Um, So what you learn on the books is completely different from what you actually do on the field. And I think the biggest thing is when you get in, you're going to be very lost. It's supernatural and it's okay. You have the best thing about this is you have a lot of people there to help you.
Mhm.
When I first entered, my seniors were always making sure that they were answering all the questions I needed. They were providing as much as support as possible. And when busy season started and hours were getting longer, they were always checking up on me and even sending me home earlier than them because they wanted me to have a nicer transition.
Yeah, that's nice.
So I think the best thing to do, when you're coming in as a first year is just to really let yourself be uncomfortable and be okay with it
Mhm.
and take in as much information as you can from everyone who's trying to help you because there will be a lot of people trying to help you because they also want you to succeed.
I guess it's a good example of the difference between accounting the way I saw it, which is, the person in the room just cracking the books and writing down a bunch of numbers for an individual's tax returns versus the actual accountant and practice, CPA and practice, which is you're part of this large team, like you're saying. And so it's really a team effort. That's a good reminder for me. Angela, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity. It's really nice, looking back and thinking and reminding myself why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't get the opportunity to do that a lot as, we're working and we're really getting ourselves into it. So it's great that I'm able to really take a step back and remember, why I'm here.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
That'll do it for today's episode of the How Do I Become podcast. Thanks again for listening. Please subscribe on Apple or Spotify podcasts if you want to hear more. We also are on Twitter and Instagram at How Do I Become One with the number 1, where we'll be posting more information about individual jobs and hoping to engage with audience. If there's feedback you want to leave us or suggestions for the future, please send it there. All of our episodes are also posted on YouTube. The channel name is How Do I Become.